Ironically, I'm off.
Can you hear me now? Can
I
you
can
see
hear
me?
you now. You just dropped off, but I can hear you now.
Yeah. I think we have one attendee on. This is interesting. Okay, we're gonna go for it. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties today. For some reason, I think we are already broadcasting. If anything happens, you just keep going. If anything happens on your end, I'll keep going, and we'll keep moving from there. I'm gonna share the screen so that we can get it live on Facebook. Those viewers who have already tuned in, thank you for tuning in. As I said before, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties, but bear with us. We're getting ready to get started. I have Mr. Randolph Reid with me. Mr. Reid, I'm going to get us on Facebook live streaming really quick, and I'll come back, and once I come back on, we'll be ready to talk. So I'll kind of do an introduction and get everything going. So just hold on tight. See if we can get this going here. We're going to have fun today. Thank you guys who are already on. Okay.
Can you bring me some more water, please?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for viewing The Voices of a Black Man. My name is E.K. James, and today I have the pleasure of having Mr. Randolph Reid here today to tell his story through his lens. Now, The Voices of a Black Man is a platform for Black men to be able to be seen and heard. So as you're listening today with us, you will not be able to comment because this conversation is not about comments, likes, or dislikes. It's about a time for you to just stop, listen, hear a man's story, a man who happens to be Black, a human being, hear his story, listen, and then check yourself for your own biases and actions that you need to take in your own life. That's simply what the Voices of Black Men platform is about, is to educate and have educated conversations to maybe help change the world one person at a time, as Black men are often talked about, and their narrative is often seen and discussed with the absence of them not being there to discuss it themselves. So today we have Mr. Randolph Reid. Mr. Reid, how are you doing today?
I'm wonderful. Good morning or good afternoon, Sherelle.
Good morning, good afternoon to you. We're right on the edge of everything, right?
That's good.
I am super excited to have you on today. Thank you. I am honored and humbled to sit down and speak with you today. And I'm just going to get right into it, if that's okay with you.
That's fine.
All right. So I want to know about the young Randolph. Where are you from? How'd you grow up?
Okay. Actually, I'm originally from High Point, North Carolina. Born, educated in High Point. Went to the public schools here. But of course, it was a time of segregation. So we only had one African American or Black high school in town. And there was one white school in town that was across town. And in such, there was a strong collaboration among African Americans, whether you were a lawyer, doctor, teacher, garbage collector. There's a gravitation for lack of a better expression, to commune with each other, to join in with each other and participate and all the activities. So everybody kind of knew everybody. Um, I mean, that's pretty much a part of how I grew up. I went to the last African American high school in High Point. It was closed in 1968. It was William Penn High School, great institution of learning, and made so many friends who are still friends now. Um, and of course, but going away to college afterwards, you know, you lose some contact, and as a result, it kind of it 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 put a void in some of the relationships that I had growing up. Ironically, what happened though is when you reconnect, you try to resume the same relationship, but you know, you were a kid at that time. You know,
Yeah.
you were young and growing, and unfortunately, it's not the same. So that's sort of how I grew up, in a nutshell.
Okay. Who were some of your influences growing up? When you think back to childhood and growing up in High Point, who were some influences for you that kind of formed and shaped you into the young man and then adult that you became?
The greatest influence or influences in my life obviously were, for me, my father and my mother. Uh, my father was, at the time, we didn't have a term that was used such as today, entrepreneurship or entrepreneur. Uh, People had a tendency to do what they could to survive the system and the process, and to just, you know, provide for their families. So my father was somewhat of an entrepreneur himself. He was, although he worked in the food service industry, and when I say food service industry, he identified a niche, and that niche was as a waiter and then maitre d', where much of his employment was with the country clubs around the area. Um, and so the insight that he gave me was that it didn't matter where I went, particularly when I went to college, I could always get a job, and that job would be somewhat of a hustle. In other words, I could always get money. I would always get tips. I would always get, you know. So it was like a survival tool that he insisted that I incorporated in my life. My mother was somewhat of an activist, forced to be that, because she saw in the community um, um, certain disparities in our community, you know. But like most women during that time, they start off doing domestic work. That wasn't an influence for me. Uh, my father felt that because he was a waiter, he could wear a suit, a tuxedo, you look well, you look good, and it was a job that had a degree of status, and you were around money, you see, and influence, because the people who were influential in the community, you know, were members of the country club. Mom, on the opposite end, was an influencer because she was a somewhat of a social activist, a community activist, and also a human services person. Um, my mother worked in the area of mental health and behavioral sciences, and influenced actually where I am today, influenced me today uh, uh, to be a human services professional. So those were the major influences in my life. There were others, you know, who, of course, in the 7 decades of my life, who have impacted my life. But you go through life, and it's sort of like a stage. There are chapters. It's a book, sort of like the title of um, your show. It's a book, and we have various chapters, that we can talk about. And in each chapter, there's something a little different. Um, but to answer your question, those were the major influences in my life.
Got you. Okay. Now let's talk about your mother and father were your major influences. You talk about being segregated, so therefore you were on one side of the tracks and dealt with African Americans primarily as you were growing up. Now, my question for you is, at what point, and I apologize about technical difficulties, but we're gonna make this work.
Yes.
At what point in your life did you realize that you were not just a young man, but you were a young Black man, and what did that mean? And I know that sounds like a crazy question, but based on kind of what you told us already, but for our viewers to really understand, what did that mean that you were not just a young man, but a young Black man, and when did you really realize that in life?
Well, I don't think I ever did not know that I was a Black man. The issue here, and so often for us as Black men, we identify ourselves as Black men because we're forced to. But in reality, we're men. Mm. It's labeled Black men, and we have to associate that with our culture, our experiences. And what I've learned through my years is, we have a tendency to operate from a place of what is familiar, comfortable, despite it being unhealthy, you see. Mm. The challenge came when we began to assimilate and try to build coalitions with other people. I'll give you an example. I was an athlete in high school, pretty much. My favorite, I played 3-4 sports, yes. But my favorite sport was basketball. And ironically, I started playing, I never played, they had a junior varsity, they had a varsity. I never played junior varsity, I always played varsity. And fortunately, I had a talent where I was able to, to start on all the years I played in high school. That experience brought me up to the last year of high school, which was 1968. We won the state championship. The state championship. But let me help you to understand. That was the state championship for the Negro Scholastic High School League. My first or most identifiable experience of knowing I was a Black man is when we played a white high school, local high school, and they were gracious enough to play us. And it was a good team. Our first game was played in their gymnasium. Our second game, when we played, because you play their home and then, the second game, our coach came in and told us, listen, guys, I need to tell you something. Tonight, we're playing in the Greensboro Coliseum. We were, to my knowledge, were the first high school, African-American, to play, I don't even know, could have been the first high school, to play in the Greensboro Coliseum. Wow. My insight of that was that they were a bit afraid for us and our fans to come to their school. So what they did was they made arrangements for us to play in that venue, Greensboro Coliseum.
Yeah.
That's when I think we all recognize the difference, because they really, accessed that and or gave access to us in that venue.
Mm-hmm.
My parents were pretty protective, as many of the parents who were pretty much aware of segregation. So, and that was, a part of my father's position, as a maitre d' and being among some of the influences, because he knew the judges, he knew lawyers, he knew the best doctors. So he could always go to them and appeal to them. So if I got in a little bit of trouble, as 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 uh, I've heard said, I got into a bit of good trouble. I got into the good trouble, not the bad trouble. When I got into the good trouble, my dad would always be able to bail us out, and at that time it was easy to get into good trouble, as an African American.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
African American male, I should say.
Got you, got you. What were so you went through high school, middle school, high school. That time, were they separated or together?
What, the high schools and middle school?
Uh-huh.
No, they were separated.
Okay.
They were separated. But one, my elementary school, when I became of age to go to middle school or junior high, as it was called at that time, they just converted the elementary school into the middle school or junior high school.
Mm-hmm.
So it had the same name. And I just walked up the hill, to go to high school. So although they weren't adjoining, they were in such close proximity, that, it was easy to get to. And it was in the African American community. So whether you lived on one side of town or the other side of town, if you were Black, you had to go to those or that particular school. Elementary school was a little different for all of us because they had a number of elementary schools. However, we only had one high school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and everything from that high school that was a white high school across town was passed down to us. So we always got secondhand, tools to work with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which again, if you really look at it ironically, how we persevere. We got secondhand goods. However, we produce some of the best minds, you see, in the area, in Carolinas, in the world. Because I have friends and colleagues, who are now plastic surgeons, who are, doctors, lawyers, politicians, business people, multi-millionaire business people, and so they produce some of the best minds, even though we were not given the resources of others.
Wow. So leaving high school, graduating high school, you said you went off to college directly from high school?
Yeah, directly from high school. It really wasn't my intention. It really wasn't. But here again, as I said to you, the origin of it was my father and the expectations of my family. Everybody had gone to college. My father went to Kentucky State. My mother did not. She finished high school and didn't, because she became pregnant with me at the time. So my parents got married at a relatively early age, but it was an expectation. It was also, I met this young lady who is now my wife for 48 years, who was an upperclassman. And it was, it was a grand thing to have an upperclassman as your girlfriend, right? She really was and still is extremely smart and lovely, and I just irresistible. So, so we met, we dated for, about a year. She went off to Hampton Institute at the time, Hampton University as it is called now. And and at the time, of course, I was not as smart as she was to get into Hampton because it was and still is one of the greatest HBCUs, and in terms of, in all areas. So I wanted to get to the nearest thing. So I was able to go across the bridge to Norfolk State University. At the time, Norfolk State was named the Norfolk Division of Virginia State College. Okay? And it wasn't a completely developed campus, but it was a campus nevertheless, and an established university connected to another great university, Virginia State. And they had one of the greatest basketball teams that ever played in the HBCU, in the CIAA, I think at that time. It was not HBCU, the CIAA. And so they were one of the greatest teams. So my pursuit was to go to that university. I did not get a scholarship or anything like that. I said, hey, I'm going. I was pursuing my future wife. Okay. So that's really where that, went,
Where did you, what did you major in? What was your major?
Physical education. It wasn't like a broad range of curricula you could get into. Either you went into education, political science, something like biology, possibly chemistry. But all of my so-called mentors at the time, because I was an athlete, were, in physical ed. They majored in physical education, the coaches and that, physical education.
Yeah.
So that's what I knew. So that's what I pursued. After that, years later, my wife and I got married in 1972. And of course, years later, there's some things that I, did at that time. We relocated to Washington, D.C., where she was actually teaching school at that time. So I left school, college, and went up to Washington after us being married. And of course, it was years later that I decided to go to Norfolk State University. But let me tell you, there's something in between all of this.
Okay.
If I may. When we moved to DC, I went to a technical college, business college. Mm-hmm. And at that time, computers had become the in thing. And so they had huge mainframe computers. And they had positions that were called computer programmers, system analysts, computer operators. Computer operators is kind of obsolete now, I believe. And this was this was another degree of enlightenment that I was a Black man. So I went to this school, trained. They would really not allow Blacks to go into the curriculum of computer programming, certainly not system analysts. It's sort of like being an NFL coach and you're African American. There were far few of us there. So I pursued computer operations, did well. And I landed a job at the Washington Navy Yard. Washington Navy Yard employed a lot of contractors. Mm-hmm. I was there. I was doing extremely well. And the thing that enlightened me, I had a good friend who happened to be Caucasian, who was my supervisor as well. He was from Denver, Colorado. And one day, long story short, I had just bought a brand new Nissan Datsun at the time, 280. You don't remember that, do you?
I
You
do. I
know?
absolutely do. I
And
had
it
an
was,
aunt who had one. It was yellow and she called it honeybee.
yeah, mine was silver, and it had all of all of the purpose. And so at the Navy Yard, what happened was there was a parking lot. You could park it as a small parking lot, but you could also park in the street. As anybody who knows Washington, D.C., parking in the street is very expensive. And this was back during the 70s. So I had to park this time on the street, which I preferred because I wouldn't get the car damaged. My friend, who was my supervisor, and I would always have lunch together. And so we were walking down the sidewalk, and he saw the car. He drove an old car, a Le Mans with a vinyl top, and the top was worn. And so when we passed, but he made very good money, certainly more than I did, probably twice as much. So we're walking down the sidewalk, and he saw my car. I didn't identify it as my car at the time. He said, "Man, that's a beautiful car." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yes, it's a beautiful car." I said, "You like that?" He said, "Man, I love that. I wish I would have that." Well, I'm like 22, 23 years old. We just bought a house. I was feeling real good about myself. I was a two-car family, a whole bit. We didn't have children at the time. But, I felt really good about myself. So as a result of that, young man feeling, I am accomplished. I said to him, "That's my car." And he looked at me astounded. He looked at me as though he had seen a ghost. He said, "That's your car?" I said, "Yes, that's my car. I just bought it, my wife and I." And he said to me at the time, the president of the company who contracted us to watch the Navy Yard was named Les Wright. He said to me, he said, "Well, I'm gonna have to talk to Les because maybe we're paying you too much money."
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. It was a week later that they came to me and told me the contract had ended. We had reached the end of the contract. I was devastated. I was devastated. That's the other degree of racism that I experienced. As I said earlier, there are stages, that we could.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I hope that helps.
And so he felt like you were doing better than him, and that definitely he would not allow.
Well, I don't know we're doing better, but in his mind, I was not supposed to have a better automobile than
Gotcha.
he. I was not supposed to have something that he felt based on his status at that time, whether it was race, whether it was position and job, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But he felt, in my opinion, that I was not worthy of having that kind of material thing.
And here you are, a hardworking man with a family, trying to just provide and have some nice things for yourself, accomplish some things for yourself. Were there other times as you look back over the 7 decades, were there other times that you look and you kind of encountered some of those same things?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, there was an event where I was. But some good things came out of this. I was um, director of a proprietary school, a business college in Washington, a chain of business colleges. And I was deputy director of a school, a very prominent school that educated, being in Washington, D.C., you have embassies, so you have a lot of diplomats. And basically, again, we educated the many of the children of diplomats who did not want to go to a four-year institution or traditional college at liberal arts college. And so here again, there was an age of computers, so everybody was moving in that direction. Well, one of the things that, because of my experience, we wanted to. Washington had a very low socioeconomic. It was a very low socioeconomic community, particularly for African Americans. Although you had some who excelled and did very well, we were attempting to bring in African Americans who were impoverished, to help develop them, to build them up, and put them in an industry that was booming.
Mhm.
And the school was actually sold to the company that I worked for, and it was sold from a British company.
Mm.
And I met this lady who was British. And when I introduced myself as Randolph. She turned and looked at me and she said, Randolph, I was kind of British, isn't it? She said, Randolph. She said, why don't they call you Randy? Randolph is so pompous.
Mhm.
She said that to me to my face.
Wow.
I
Wow.
laughed. The other incident at this particular school was that it was run by, um, um, again, I know the show is not about race, not,
Mhm.
but if I can identify this, it was run by a Jewish gentleman. And most of the proprietary schools at that time were. But what they did is they learned and they brought in people to train impoverished or minority students.
Mhm.
It was a good thing, particularly in Washington, D.C. And the actual director was white. Um, and I ended up actually, there was some incidents that went on there. And of course, I ended up losing that job as a result of, and I think it was, all about race.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but life goes on, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. One of the things I'm very interested in, because we talk about, you said it, and it's something that has stuck with me since we've talked before you came on the show, and even today you've said it about having 7 decades of life,
Uh-huh.
which is definitely an honor, right? So that means you've seen a lot of things over your lifetime, from going from segregation to being desegregated. When you look at where we are today, and in times of segregation and growing up, do you think that we have come far? Do we have far to go? Where are we right now as a society and a community?
This is just my opinion, and I'm sure it's
Absolutely.
arguable. I think we have come very far as a, I think in many areas. Some areas we become and stagnant in some areas. I think because what I see is, and this is why, to me, as I talk to some of my colleagues, as I talk to people that I'm able to act as a mentor in some way, um, and many of those people are very successful in life. And as I look at the social platform, Facebook, what I find different than when I came up is people identify themselves individually. They pat themselves on the back, versus the group,
Mm,
the community. Now, granted, there are some people who recognize and applaud community effort, group effort, you know. But I think the important thing to me in collaboration. Collaboration, is goes back to the beginning of time. You know, God collaborated with the Holy Trinity. There was a collaboration between God, the Holy Ghost, Jesus. There was a collaboration. There was a collaboration between he and Adam. Eve breached the contract. You see, there was a collaboration throughout history. Collaboration works. I think we don't do enough of that. Uh, and if you look in comparison, the power that we struggle, one finger is not as powerful as a fist.
mm,
Back when I said earlier, we had communities that came together. Even the movement of Black Lives Matter, now everybody's not on the same page. Um, and we identify success. Um, I think, according to our pocketbook. But we don't own anything significant. An example is this. If you look at African Americans, even in business, and you take the comparative divide, although there's some successes, if you take the CEO of Amazon, you take Facebook, you take Walmart, there are four white people really who make enough money to rule almost any country in the world. We only have, what, four African American or black, 4 or 5 black billionaires who are on the lower end of that. I use that as an example to simply say that's how far we are in terms of being behind. It's through no fault of ours. I mean, well, some is. But, certainly I think that there's some corporates involved, but I think that if we look at ourselves in terms of self-sustaining, building up our own communities, those people who collaborate, who are being successful, and collaborate with those people who are not as successful and bring them up and help build the communities. I have communities in my town in the 7th decade where the community looks the same as it did 70 years ago. It doesn't go up, it's just devalued, you see. And that concerns me a great deal. I have another example is I talked to some of my colleagues and they measure themselves in terms of success based on how they are defined by white men and how that has transferred itself into some idealism that many successful black men have. So the black men who are not doing as well, there's a void there where they are not helped to elevate themselves. And the void seems to me that, example, this good friend of mine who said, to me as we were at a place, his place, it wasn't my place, in the mountains recently. I told you my wife and I were there. It was a beautiful place, beautiful atmosphere. He doesn't really know our story, but he said to me, as he is a millionaire, he said to me, man, them white folks sure know how to live, don't they? And he's our friend. I just, what can you do but smile and shrug your shoulders to some degree. But I'm saying, how are you basing your success? Is your success based on, how you impress, white people, so what we have a tendency to do is separate ourselves in that way according to our status. And it's all about the pocketbook. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with making money. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having nice things, better things. That's good. That's wonderful. But there's too much individualism and not enough collaboration. There's some collaboration that appears to be collaboration, but it's not reaching the levels that it should reach underneath. You understand what I'm saying?
I think I do, but I'd like to hear more about that, of what you're saying. Well, not incriminating anyone or any organization, but just more of what you're saying.
I see that there's so much disparity. There is a now I worked with a population of marginalized people, African Americans, all races. Being a mental health professional that I am, that is somewhat retired, do consulting. And I'm currently working with a population that's considered emotionally and intellectually disabled. They're grown men, 50, 60 years old, that are completely forgotten about. And you have a system that basically keeps them or cares for them, makes money off of them, yet does not provide for them all of the resources that they need to improve their lives. You know, although they are limited, you know, to some degree, behaviorally and intellectually, you know, there's still skills that they can learn. There's still things that they can. I find that younger men in the African American community, and again, I work with a mentor group. It's called Brothers Organized to Save Others. It's a 30-year organization, mentor program that mentors kids with, the acronym is BOTSO. It's a local organization. And the organization, basically, we mentor young kids from 12, 13 years old up to 17, 18 years old. And when I see these young folk, they don't have some of the exposure that that we define as being successful. They are they don't know exactly where to go. You know, they don't have the guidance, the leadership, and that's one of the reasons our program has been put in place, to try to provide the guidance, the leadership, to help elevate their lives. Because there's such a gap where people who have reached certain levels of success don't really reach back down to that population, that marginalized population. Is that better? Does that help?
Yes. So what I hear you saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I hear you saying is that there, because of, in some ways, capitalism, not that capitalism is a bad thing,
right,
but making it more of a priority than human beings or community, it has allowed it to us to some entities to provide support or help, but not to the degree that they could, because that may take them out of business, or that may take away that pipeline that the money is coming in from, if I help you past this point. So it looks like on the surface that are collaborating, and in some ways it's not, I'm not saying that good is not happening. So we're not saying good is not happening, but in a lot of ways we're still keeping them dependent, or keeping people dependent on the system or the process. Is that what I hear you saying?
Very well said. Thank you for restating that.
And
that's it.
Yeah, I was going to say, you talked about it in the sense of emotional marginalized and emotional intelligence, and I can't help but take it to a bigger platform in society when we talk about minorities altogether, right? Not just Black people, but minorities, especially in America, and how there are things that are put in place to make it seem and feel like, yep, we're helping you out, we're getting you on the way. Something as simple as you talked about earlier, being in entrepreneurship and access to capital. Minorities don't have the same access to capital that Caucasians may have, right? Don't have the same access to investors or resources or the education in that way. And I heard you earlier saying, I want to pull this back to you going to college and having a limited source of what you could major in college, because certain things weren't afforded to you, whether it was limited by the college you went to or limited because of your race.
That's exactly right.
which is interesting. You know, Mr. Reid, that's very interesting to me. I want to clear up something for the viewers as well. You mentioned a couple of things, and I want to make sure, because our viewership is very diverse, I want to make sure they understand what those things are. You talked about going to Norfolk State and your wife going to Hampton Institute, which is now Hampton University now, and in Virginia, both in Virginia. HBCU stands for Historically Black College and Universities. Let me say that again. Got tongue-tied. Historically Black colleges and universities. Can you speak really quickly as we move forward, because I think it's a necessary point for our viewers to understand why there are historically Black colleges and universities, and why it was prestigious as a Black man and a Black woman to go to these colleges and universities.
Well, you know, I said to you earlier, you know, I use a statement of how people operate from a place of what is familiar, what is comfortable, despite it being unhealthy or healthy, for that matter, and collaboration. HBCU, or Historically Black College and University, is an environment that cultivates collaboration. It cultivates excellence. You know, I think it helps establish us on a different level, to help us to introduce us to a world that we may or may not be familiar with. If I may give you an example, I said my wife went to Hampton Institute, but my wife also went to Georgetown University School of Dentistry. She's a graduate there. At that time, she was the only African American to graduate in her class. You see, there were probably 3 or 4 who went to the School of Dentistry at Georgetown. And at that time, Georgetown was one of the top 2 or 3 dental schools in the country. And she went on full scholarship. So what we would often talk about is she would have been grounded and rooted in an HBCU. Now she was able to matriculate in a university, you know, that, of course, at Georgetown, you had a diverse population, but it's not an institution that's under the umbrella of HBCUs, for real. And she was able to be successful in that process, you know, because of the transition. If she had not been rooted and grounded, you know, it may have made it, it could have possibly made it more challenging for her to make that transition. See? Did that answer your question? Did that help?
It did. You absolutely did. I'll throw in there, you know, that there was a time when we couldn't go to any other what we call mainstream universities, right, and colleges. And so HBCUs were born. Yeah. But it definitely is prestigious, and where African Americans, I believe, and I'm from an HBCU as well, in my bachelor's, Elizabeth City State University. Okay. So not too far from, I partied at Hampton and Norfolk. That's a whole nother story, Mr. Reid. Whole nother story. But it does ground you. It allows you to understand who you are, and to nurture you in a way that I think the world doesn't nurture you. You know, there was a quote that I found during homecoming last year. Homecoming means, you know, when you come back and the big game is played between the rival school or whatnot. And there's a quote that I found on Facebook, and I'm not going to say it exactly right, but I think I could say this gist of it. And I want to get your take on it. And it was because I think as African Americans that go to HBCUs, we are gung-ho, right, about going back to the school, especially homecoming, definitely being an alumni and putting our talents into the school that educated us. But homecoming is one of those big things for us, right? Yes, yes. in that, I found a quote that said, "You wonder why Black people are so excited and so gung ho," and that's not the word it used, but this is my paraphrasing about homecoming
Mm-hmm.
in their university. It said it's because it's the only 4 years in their life where they were the majority.
That's right. That's right. You know, Sherelle, you know, I had an opportunity during this part of my life, another chapter in my life, where and this happened as a result of my wife attending Georgetown University. We had very good friends and built strong relationship with a young man who was a businessman. Now, granted, I'm in my late 20s, early 30s, and he was from Ghana. His wife was from Ghana, and so we ended up being involved in a import-export business. Well, at that time, everybody had become somewhat Afrocentric. So everybody wanted statues, and you know, you see in my house, I got statues and masks, all that stuff. Everybody wanted those. So I had the opportunity to travel, you know, to Africa. Now, my first experience, and some of the viewers out there who have gone to Africa, who happen to be African Americans, may have experienced the same thing. But I remember our first stop was in Liberia. It was basically West Africa, and spent a little time there. Went to Senegal, spent a little time there. You know, went to Ghana, in Accra. You know, spent a great deal of time there. Um, the country called Togo. Now, my point is, I lived in Washington, D.C. at that time. George Clinton, who is Funkadelic All-Star, had named D.C. Chocolate City. Well, clearly, D.C. had a population of about 5,200. Mayor Washington was the mayor, then soon after Marion Barry came. Well, when I was in Ghana, I had never seen so many people who looked like me, you know, and it was astounding because everywhere I went, when I went to the airport, the chief of the airport was African American. The president of the country was African American. The secretary of state was African American. You know, the bank president was African American. Everywhere you went. And so when I talk to my African friends, they don't associate themselves with being African American or anything like that. They don't even know. My brother-in-law is from Nigeria. He said to me, when I came here, you know, somebody said to me, hey, cousin, hey, cuz, he said, he called home, he told his mom, he said, I didn't know I had so many cousins. You know, they don't understand or don't have any reflection of racism, you know, because it's not a part of their general makeup. It's not a part of something they experience. Exposure is everything.
Yeah.
Experiences, it brings about experiences that that enhance or diminish your life. You see, cycle. So HBCUs, what it helps solidify who I am. People come back to homecoming because what they do, it rejuvenizes us. It rejuvenates. It brings us back to a place where we're rooted and grounded, and that's why Africa did so much. And when I was director of student affairs at the University of Washington, called Southeastern University, that educated again children of diplomats and heads of embassies. So we had one of the largest population of international students in the country at the time because of that. I developed a curriculum where every 2 years, or freshman, sophomore, where that student had to, if it was African American, we made way for them to travel to Africa for a visit, you know, so they could be enlightened, because we're confused, I think, even about that, you know. I don't know any Africans who necessarily aspire to be African Americans, you see. When you go to Africa, you don't find people walking around with dashikis, they dress like us in suits and ties, men at least.
Right.
You know, at
Everything's got
least.
jungles and tigers.
Right, right, exactly. So, you know, HBCUs are just mean so much
Yeah.
to us.
Yeah.
And so we all should continue, if we're alumni, we should all continue to support those institutions.
Absolutely. Now, let me ask you this because I am just very curious, Mr. Reid. I mean, we talk about, and I love that this it seems like the theme of our conversation today is through the second 7 decades. I absolutely love it, and I love the honesty that you have to just embrace. Yeah, I've got 7 decades, and I got a lot to talk about and a lot of experience. Growing up as a young man, um, there are places that you probably felt that you could never aspire to be, such as president. um, what did and I don't care what side of the line you're on. That's not what this is about. It's more so about, for you, did you ever think that in your lifetime you would see a black man in office as the president? And what did that do for you as a black man when it happened?
Mm. Um, well, I never, you know, I didn't give it any thought, you know, about a black man being president or a woman being president for that matter. You never gave it any thought. It was somewhat a condition of the mind that it is what it is. When Jesse Jackson ran for president, you know, and even before that, when Shirley Chisholm did, well, you know, it was an impossible dream, but the point of it is she was challenging the system. When Jesse ran, I don't think he felt that it was a possibility he could win, but you know, it symbolized an expression of we're still here, you know, and this is, you know, we are somebody, we are worthy of holding the road. When Barack was elected, just like every other African American that I know, and perhaps in this country, I was overjoyed, you know, just overjoyed. I think, though, for most of us, as we do, we had these high expectations that somehow he was going to come in and save us, you know, and so I never thought about that. I was just happy to see that we had somebody on record in my lifetime that held that position, you know, of power, the most powerful position in the world, as far as I'm concerned. You know, he held that, and quite frankly, I think he did a fantastic job. You know, for what he had to work with, because he had to clean up a lot of things.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of things. Did not have enough time to do all the work, so it would have perhaps impacted us in a greater way. But that's kind of how it is for us. We clean up the garbage, and then once it's all done, the streets are clean. Then, you know, somebody else steps in and takes over and claims it. You know.
Yeah.
So I'm just elated and excited, and all those good. Oh, I was at the time.
The impact going forward. So, do you think that Shirley Chisholm and Jesse Jackson, because they challenged the system prior to that opened and led way for Barack Obama?
I don't know if it had anything to do with it, because most people at that time, most people who are living or were living at the time of Barack Obama's nomination and election don't even know who Shirley Chisholm is. And, you know, certainly don't know or recognize that Jesse Jackson was that. I mean, because listen, you know, we came out with Bill Clinton being the black president. You know, he's our president. Disregarded Jesse. You know, I mean, although Jesse didn't accomplish, you know, becoming president,
Yeah.
Well, but he is us, not Bill Clinton. But
Yeah.
so I don't know how much or if it had an impact, if Shirley Chisholm or Jesse had an impact on Barack Obama becoming president. Honestly, that's my opinion.
So do you think we gave away, because the point that you've just made is something that I say all the time, that we quickly give away a title to someone because in our minds and because of history, we don't foresee one of us of color being in that position or space. So we quickly lend it to someone of another ethnicity, such as giving our president, the black president for us was Bill Clinton, in that way, and kind of giving him a black card, right? Of
Uh-huh.
he's one of us. He plays the saxophone. He loves jazz. He's one of us.
Yeah.
Are we too quick to give up and not keep hope?
Well, I think I think it's a condition where we are taught to assimilate, you know, and not regenerate ourselves, so we can not understanding that we're kings and queens and all the other stuff, that we come from that, and that's the thing that enlightened me when being in Africa, when you see people of that level, kings who are honored, the community honors them, you see all of this stuff. I mean, we give away even our communities. I mean, for an example is, Black women love to do their hair and their nails and that. I don't know very many of us who control that industry. I don't know any of us who truly control that industry. We're in it, we're involved in it. There's some who are making a strong effort. But we allow other people to actually come into our community and take over complete shopping centers in our community. Complete shopping centers, you know. And all we do is become consumers of the product, you know, that they are supplying us. So they can cut us off at any time they choose to. They can close the store anytime they choose to. They can deny us access anytime they choose to. So I think I went on a tangent on that.
No, I'm with you, because I was going to take it here. I'm with you, Mr. Reid, because I was going to go back to what you said earlier. And that is, which kind of brings that full circle, is that's why mentorship is so important. That's why those who are successful have to reach back to teach, because I think that what's lacking there is that disconnect that you talked about earlier in being educated and having the resources and the know-how, because the few that do are not reaching back. I'm not saying everybody, but just on a whole, to kind of talk about reiterate what you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, we celebrate our individual accomplishments. And that's one of the reasons why I used the example of those four, I'm sorry, those four people who are Caucasian who have so much of the wealth, yet, I almost can bet you if you go into the school system and you ask African American students to name 2 or 3 African American billionaires, the only one they could name is probably Oprah and now Michael Jordan. See, but they know about Amazon, they know about Facebook, they know about all of it. They may not know who the CEOs are, but they know about their product, and what they do is they, again, that's another example of how people continue to reap resources out of our community, and we are not able to rebuild or build in our communities. And those people who have left the community don't come back to help to rebuild the community. They move on up, as George Jefferson say, to the east side, and then, those folk are forgotten,
Yeah. So that lends me to this question about leadership.
Okay.
Because a lot of the leadership that we're seeing, like John Lewis, C.T. Vivian, are now gone. Great men that have done life's work,
Yeah.
right? We can truly say they were a purpose blueprint for life's work. Um, but we have so many more that may still be here, but are in your age range, right behind your age range when we talk about leadership. And when I look around, I'm not seeing the next generation of leadership.
Yeah.
And I'm not pointing fingers to anybody, but my question for you is, what are we lacking in leadership and how do we get it?
Well, I, I think, just here again, my opinion, and that's why I'm here, is that we have we have been inundated as a people with so many distractions, and there's subtle distractions that take us off course. Social media is a good thing. Here we are. It's a great thing. But sometimes I think it can be mishandled, misused, and not used. Uh, Everybody doesn't have, most of the impoverished kids don't have access to computers like this. That's one of the issues as we move through this COVID-19 thing, with teachers attempting to educate kids. The people who are going to be left out are the people in the most marginalized and impoverished communities. You know, so what I'm saying is that um, somehow these distractions have created a greater void. And I don't really know, Sherelle, how we can get back there, but it's clearly a void.
Mm-hmm.
And even for someone that has 7 decades, that gap is so broad for me to reach out to tell a young man that you need to pull your pants up on your waist, not wear your pants below your waist, you see. And I can understand how uncomfortable that can be, you know. Uh, I was helping my wife put out some flowers yesterday, and I didn't put a belt on. My pants fell down. And I was like, she said, and can you imagine somebody wearing their pants down? But it's so uncomfortable. But yet, and still, they operate from that place.
Yeah.
Familiarity, comfortable, unhealthy. And so we become conditioned to just, embrace that. And our kids or the younger population have become, I think, comfortable just simply trying to survive in a world that they are so unfamiliar with.
Yeah.
And they've developed a degree of comfort, despite it being healthy. Don't look at health. And I say health, I mean in every arena, whether it's spiritual, whether it's economics, whether it's, psychological, whether it's social, you know, and so it's unhealthy in their environments. And so they assimilate, you know, and to the point where they just simply are attempting to survive,
Mm.
you know. Um,
When you, when we talk about the civil unrest that we
mhm.
have right now, um, and I'm just going to use the word civil unrest. I struggle with that word a lot. Um, but for lack of a better term right now, I haven't come up with a term that I'm not struggled with yet. But when we think about the civil unrest and we think about the protests and just the climate of where things are today, I want to ask you this question because you have a lot of experience and you've been through a lot of things from segregation to desegregation to now. Um, what plays in your mind, or what thoughts do you have as you see things unfolding? Because I'm sure that in some ways they're familiar and in some ways they're different. Um, what do you say to yourself, or what are the feelings that you're having around it?
Well, I the feeling that I'm having is First of all, it's sort of deja vu. It's a feeling of deja vu, but it's a scarier feeling for me because we have made significant progress. And when you think about the voting rights being challenged, when you think about our basic civil rights now being challenged, you see the conditions of our people, African Americans, who in our communities where they're not really, there's not a form of or a plan to redevelop, to regenerate those communities. The regeneration comes in the sense of, uh, what's the term? Gentrification, you know, where, you know, people move in, not like us, develop, they get the money to develop, and then they move us out, you see. And so it's sort of a feeling of despair. But here again, I have 7 decades of life living. I have the feeling, but that's not important. What's important is that I think the young folk, I mean, God forbid it's anytime soon, but you know, I'm basically on my way out. I'm on the last leg, last run. You see, my despair comes from my children. I have 2 beautiful granddaughters. You know, for my granddaughters, you know, what are they going to do with the challenges that they're being confronted with? Um, it's a new frontier now. You know, it's a new frontier. Um, Technology has made it such. But dear, we have to be careful because I think in that, you know, um, um, you know, there's a devil's workshop in that too. And we have to really be careful about some of the incentives that are out there. This stimulus package that they get, you know, it's great. It helps. It develops. But you know, there's a devil's workshop in that, in my opinion. You know, um, but it's to pacify and distract. You know, from the real issues that we have to deal with. So I'm not. I don't feel very good about where we are, or even where we're headed, because there's no leadership um, in our communities, and there's no leadership in this country. And if we assimilate, as we have done years, if there's not leadership on top, we'll simulate that. So it's not going to be any leadership in the middle or on the bottom. You see.
So let me take this just a little bit further. I want to go just a little bit further in this, and I'm wrapping up with you. We got a couple more questions, and I thank you so much for your time. But to take it just a little bit further in a difference, and because I really want to hear your take on this. One of the difference that I'm seeing during the civil rights movement and during now is that not the world, because of technology, the world is watching. And the world is protesting, and the world is demanding of America something different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are people of other ethnicities, and I'm not saying that there weren't other ethnicities that protested and marched and fought in the civil rights, but at bigger proportions, we see more of other ethnicities protesting and marching on African Americans' behalf, where before it was more African Americans marching on their behalf and a small amount of other ethnicities, right? Mm-hmm. Supporting or trying to help. Does that make a difference in getting us to turn and move to something that's better, do you think? Or do you think that has a different recipe?
I'm of opinion, I'm of this opinion, because the world is changing. Not in, you know, we call ourselves Black, African American, from a place of culture mostly. Here again, it has to be culture because there are other black people in the world, you know, and their culture is much different than African Americans, right? But what they've done is they've grouped us into this thing in America that's called black. Um, I think because there's now a tolerance um, for blending. What I mean by that is cultures are blending, people of color are blending, people who are not of color are blending with people of color. So when you begin to take that, you reduce the blackness in terms of color, but you also integrate a different culture. And because the world has gotten smaller in terms of us being able to do travel, just the internet and that kind of thing, we're learning more about each other. And we're learning more now that we're more alike than different. As a result of that, I think the world would never be, but there's a faction that wants to keep it as it was.
Yeah.
You know, um, as it was. Um, because they feel threatened, you know, because they recognize that there is a now complete integration of the world. Integration.
Almost like another desegregation happening, but on a global level.
On a global level now, you know, on a global level. And so, you know, that's a big wheel to stop.
Yeah.
You know, that's a heavy, big, long train to stop rolling. And we're doing that. But what I personally don't want to see is we become distracted with that and try to carve out a niche that continues to make us one of the largest, if not the largest minority. You see what I'm saying? Without power.
Yeah, yeah.
You see, because if we continue to maintain kind of the status quo and idea, we're going to be the minority. You know, I think George Frazier said one time I heard him talk, and he said, um, I think by the year of 2050, I mean, yeah, 2050, you know, we're going to be pretty much annihilated economically. So you see these little faction of people who are making maybe six figures, far from $1 million six figures is, right?
Yeah.
Even $1 million now, when at one point in time, we could calculate that $1 million was a lot of money. $1 million, you could blow through that in no time in today's economy. You know, $1 billion, if I aspire to be that, which is a hard challenge for a lot of us. So it's not something where we applaud ourselves in terms of African Americans, you know, and just stop there. You know, we have to keep going, but it can't just be about money. It has to be about developing and building our communities, becoming self-sustaining, you know. So if in fact we remain a small group, at least we have a community that's self-sustaining, that can provide, that manufactures, and it truly becomes a village, a world, you know, that we can sustain ourselves in, uh, where we can sustain ourselves into a larger world. See?
Got you. So I've got to ask you this question. I've got like 2 or 3 more questions for you, Mr. Reid. I've got to ask you this question. Growing up as a young man who decided to get married, decided to have a family, now with precious grandchildren, what are your fears? What were your fears and hopes then and even now as it relates to your children, your grandchildren, the youth in our society? What are those fears and hopes?
Well, you know, even before George Floyd, my son, who's now 38, I believe, 37, 38, who travels, um, you know, and mostly it's driving. Um, I had the greatest fear. I pray for him every night. I mean, every day, throughout the day. Although he's great, he's polite, not just polite, but he's also a, a black man who knows right from wrong. We taught him that way. So if he's pulled over by the police, he's going to ask questions. He knows what to do. But, the way this recklessness is going on, now, I fear for him. I fear for him. My daughter also the same. We have two children, a son and daughter. The same. I my daughter, who is our oldest child, was adopted, and biologically, I mean not biologically, but yeah, well biologically, her biological parents are from Somalia. So technically, she has all the Somalian features, all of them. She's beautiful. My grandchildren are beautiful. They're two girls. So I have a concern for them, but I have a greater concern for my son. As he moves, and and he loves his daughters. He tries to do all he can to do that. So I just every day, you walk as a father, as a brother, as an uncle, cousin. I just fear for all of us, particularly from 17, 18 years old, to 35, 36, 40 years old, and older. I can't even put an age range on it because it doesn't even matter now. As long as they assume that, as long as they look at us and the color of our skin, then, we are at risk.
Yeah. At the end of the day, when it's all said and done, what's your mark on the world? What's your legacy?
That's a good one. That's a good one because folk talk about legacy and leaving legacy, and what I find is, legacies are made. However, for me, I think the legacy is I want to be recognized as a person who is honest, has or had a strong proclivity to integrity, doing the right thing, helping others who are not adequately equipped or capable of taking themselves to the next level. Our connection here through Jimmy Davies was a connection through a collaboration of other great people. And so as a result of them treating me well, collaborating, having me, I was able to introduce several people to Jimmy Davies, recognizing the common or the likeness and how they could help build each other, build a platform, So I want to be able to have a legacy where people know that I had great integrity, I was honest, and I did the best that I could, for my family, to uplift them, my friends to uplift them, and that I lived happy, loved,
Yeah. I love that. I absolutely love that. Now I do what's called a quick fire, a rapid quick fire of questions.
Okay.
And are you ready for this, Mr. Reid?
I do my best.
Okay. What's your favorite food?
My favorite food?
Uh-huh.
Gee, girl, you really put me on the line now. You know, my wife is right back.
Uh-oh, uh-oh. I didn't say the favorite cook. I just said the favorite food. Uh-oh, but that may reveal the favorite cook.
But she's such a wonderful cook. I mean, all of her food is just favorite for me. You know,
Uh-huh.
she's always coming up with something. But I think, and it's probably as a result of me just recently having this, is spaghetti and meatballs.
Okay.
Yeah,
Spaghetti and meatballs.
yeah.
What's your favorite movie?
Oh, wow. Um, my favorite movie is um, I'm gonna have to give that some thought. Can we come back?
Okay. Okay. Favorite song?
Oh, favorite song is probably, I'm a jazz lover. I was a jazz radio announcer for a while. But I think my favorite song is Earth, Wind, and Fire tune. What's the name of the tune? We Are the World. I think that's it. We Are the World.
What is it about that song?
Um, I like the song because it speaks to my spiritual nature. You know, um, the tune kind of plays back in my head a little bit. Um, I can't remember the words exactly. You would say, well, if it's your favorite song, you should remember it. But I can't. It's 70 years old. Sometimes things slip. So I was just listening to it. Just listening to it the other night. My wife and I was sitting outside, and beautiful. And I was playing it because this a radio announcer by the name of DJ Cassidy did an online kind of greeting with all his favorites, um, including Denise Williams and Kool and the Gang and so many other greats. Bobby Brown. And it was a great show. So Earth, Wind and Fire, Philip Bailey was on there singing, and so when I heard the tune, it just brought just joy to my heart.
Mm,
Yeah.
okay.
So I'm sorry I can't
Favorite
give you the
vacation?
exact name. Huh?
Oh, that's okay. That's quite all right. Favorite destination or vacation spot?
Oh, favorite destination has to be between Hawaii and Costa Rica. Yeah.
What is it about Hawaii and Costa Rica?
I like the tropics. Hawaii, there are no snakes, I understand, because at least I wasn't confronted by it, and specifically Maui.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I like the fact that when you're in the more rural areas and you're going up in the mountainside, you have the various um, um, climates. I mean, you can get 4 or 5 seasons in Hawaii,
Wow.
at one time. And so, particularly when you go to a little place called Hana, it's the road to Hana. It's a little city, you know, but it's the terrain to get there. If you drive, it's about 30 miles away from downtown Maui, but it takes you about 3 hours to get there. So because you have to go through these winding roads that terrifies my wife. She'll say she'll never do it again. Costa Rica, Costa Rica is almost completely opposite, although Costa Rica has, much forestry and there's much to do in Costa Rica. The food is wonderful. The people are wonderful. It's just a fantastic place. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
so yeah.
What about your, and last question, favorite hobby?
My favorite hobby is two: reading and listening to jazz.
Any particular books you like to read?
Yeah, I'm reading. I've read several actually. I have so many. I'm one book that's a very thick book that I'm reading, and some of you may know it. It's I don't know if you see it. It's by Abram X Kendi. It's titled Stamped from the Beginning. Stamped from the Beginning. And he does a wonderful job in exploring how we as African Americans have come to this point, you know, and he talks about some of the distractions. He identifies historically, you know, people who played their various roles, you know, in us being where we are today. You know, it's a great book. It's a very thick book. So you have to, unless you're a fast reader, you know, you know, it's going to take you some time to get through. At least it took me some time, you know, to get through the book. But it's a great book. Yeah.
Mr. Reid, I have had an awesome time with you. I thank you so much for just sitting down and honestly being transparent and just sharing your story through your lens with us. You know, the last thing that I like to do with anyone who comes on and have a conversation with me is give them some time, give them the platform to say whatever else may be on their heart or their mind, whether it's to an individual, community, or society, or the world, that you may not have had a chance to say, may not have been heard for, or just, this is what I need to say today, you know, type thing. So I want to offer that opportunity to you right now, some time to just say whatever is on your heart, and I'm going to be quiet.
Okay. I pray that we as a um, race of people, if I will, um, allow ourselves to appreciate those around us who love and cherish um, us. I think it's important for us to now recognize that we have more in common than not allow the distractions of this world um, to inundate us to the degree that we forget about each other. And I'm a strong proponent, if you will, in my faith. Um, and I thank God that He has sustained me and my wife and my family, have given me such great friends um, that embrace me and love me as much as I love them. I think it's so important because it brings about almost a natural form of collaboration. And it's done in such a fashion that um, it's done unconditionally, you know? But we must all understand that, you know, there is reciprocity that has to take place. So you can't always receive. You have to give and give back. And some of us can give more than others. But whatever we have in terms of whether it's money, whether it's time, energy, you know, we must find a way to give back to the roots of where we came from. And so that's kind of how I end up in High Point, North Carolina, where I came from. You know? So.
Thank you so much, Mr. Reid, for your words. You know, the one word that I heard you say throughout this is collaboration, is making sure that we're not just being an individual, but we're looking after our community, reaching back to those that from where we came from, that made us who we are, and making sure that we're collaborating because together we're stronger than we are by ourselves. Thank you so much for this time. To our viewers, I want to say thank you so much for listening to the Voices of a Black Man today, where Mr. Randolph Reid told his story through his lens. Now, the philosophy of the Voices of a Black Man is very simple. It's for you to see and hear a Black man. The second part, you get to partake in. is to be able to see, hear, check biases that you may have or may not even known that you had, but based on him telling his story and giving us experiences, that it brought something up that maybe you need to explore just a little bit more. It's up to you now to decide to lean in, explore, and take those actions. Thank you for watching. I'm CK James. This has been the Voices of Black Men with Mr. Randolph Reid. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you, Sherelle.
Thank you. Mr. Randolph, don't go anywhere.
All right, I will.